I never imagined that someone could make me feel invisible in my own home. But that's exactly what happened when Alex Reynolds came into our lives. My name is Emma Carter, and my mother, Laura, had always been my anchor, my safe place in a world that often felt cold and unpredictable. I used to wake up on weekends to the smell of pancakes, the sound of my mother humming in the kitchen, and the warmth of our small living room filled with laughter. But when Alex married my mom, everything shifted. At first, I told myself it was just adjustment. Blended families take time. I reasoned, but deep down, a knot of unease formed every time I heard him speak. Every time I saw the way he looked at me, like I was some problem he had to manage rather than a person to love. The first warning sign came almost immediately. Alex would make casual comments in front of my mom that felt off, things like, "Emma doesn't need to worry about this," or, "Laura, you've got enough on your plate," without Emma tagging along. I didn't say anything at first, thinking I was being overly sensitive, but a pit in my stomach grew every time my mother nodded silently, her eyes flickering briefly to mine before looking away. I couldn't tell if she was agreeing, tired, or under some sort of spell. It felt as though my voice, my presence, was slowly being erased, one carefully placed word at a time. This sense of exclusion was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it burrowed into me, making every family dinner, every small decision, a test of whether I belonged at all. By the time I was 13, it became impossible to ignore. Alex began restricting our interactions under the guise of family management. He would insist I stay in my room while he and my mom discussed finances, or tell me I was too young to attend certain outings. I remember the afternoon, he said, with that smug certainty that always made my blood run cold. "Your mom doesn't need you anymore, Emma. She's fine without you." The words hit me like a punch, reverberating through my chest and settling in my throat. I wanted to argue, to cry, to run to my mom, but I didn't. There was a shadow in her eyes when he spoke, something that looked like resignation. Maybe for and I felt paralyzed, unsure whether I was being punished or erased. I stayed silent, letting the words sink into my bones, and from that day on, a distance began to grow between us that I didn't understand and couldn't bridge. Evenings became the hardest. I would sit in my room, the walls closing in around me, listening to muffled laughter and conversation downstairs. I could hear Alex and my mom talking, her voice calm, almost neutral, and his commanding, almost hypnotic. I tried to speak up sometimes, asking small questions, offering opinions, or sharing little moments from my day. But Alex had a way of cutting them off or redirecting the conversation so skillfully that I felt like I was fading into the background. My mother's eyes, once full of warmth and attention, would flicker briefly toward me before returning to his voice. It wasn't malicious on her part, not at first. But the effect was the same. I was slowly being rendered irrelevant in the person's life I valued most. School was no refuge either. I would come home with stories, excited about small victories or little moments of friendship, hoping to share them, only to be met with a quiet house or a distracted mother. Alex would intercept questions, redirect topics, or simply tell me to let mom handle it. I felt trapped in a strange limbo, a mixture of guilt, confusion, and heartache. Was I overreacting? Was I imagining this isolation? Or had it been deliberately orchestrated? The more I tried to connect, the more I felt pushed away. The house I once felt safe in had transformed into a maze where my presence was minimized, my feelings dismissed, and my existence questioned. By the time I turned 14, I realized that this wasn't accidental. Alex had systematically isolated me, and the casual cruelty of his words had created a chasm between my mother and me that I didn't know how to cross. That was the moment everything changed. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore, couldn't trust the subtle reassurances that came wrapped in charm. And I couldn't help noticing the strange quietness in my mother's eyes, the hesitation when she met mine, as if she was torn between loyalty to her husband and love for me. I didn't know then how far he would go, or what secrets he had buried to keep me at a distance. But the ache in my chest, the confusion, and the growing sense of betrayal were unmistakable. Every day that passed, I felt smaller, less seen, and more determined to one day uncover the truth. By the time I turned 15, Alex's control over my life felt suffocating. Every day I woke up feeling like I was walking on eggshells, unsure if a casual question or a small attempt to connect with my mom would set him off. He had a way of speaking that made everything sound normal, like he was just helping our family function. But every word was layered with manipulation. I began to doubt my own instincts, questioning whether I was overreacting, imagining slights that weren't real. But deep down, I knew he was isolating me, controlling my interactions with my mom, and shaping her perception of me in ways I couldn't fight against. I remember one afternoon vividly. I had been practicing my violin, my fingers stiff on the strings, hoping to share a small victory with my mom. When I walked into the living room, Alex was there, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. He smiled that irritating, calculated smile and said, "Mom doesn't need to hear about this right now. Why don't you just keep practicing in your room?" I froze. My heart hammered in my chest, my violin case heavy in my hands, and I felt a flush of shame, as though I had done something wrong simply by existing. My mom's eyes flickered toward me, but she didn't speak. That small moment, repeated countless times, became a pattern. I realized he was not only isolating me physically, but emotionally, teaching me to doubt my own worth in my mother's eyes. School offered little relief. I had friends, of course, but the weight of home followed me like a shadow. Each phone call with my mom had to be carefully navigated. Alex would often pick up or be present nearby, subtly steering conversations, asking leading questions, or making passive-aggressive comments about my behavior. Sometimes I would hear him say things like, "She's too emotional, isn't she?" Or, "Your mom's got enough to handle without worrying about you." Each statement landed like a brick on my chest, leaving me breathless and unsure if I should defend myself or remain silent. Silence became my shield, my defense against his manipulation, even though it left me feeling hollow and unseen. By 16, the isolation had reached its peak. Family outings became carefully controlled events. Alex would tell me I wasn't needed, that my mother preferred to handle certain things alone, or that I should stay home because I was too young to understand. The truth was, he wanted me out of the way. Invisible, powerless, I would sit in my room, staring out the window at neighbors' children, laughing with their parents, my chest aching with longing and anger. Each day of exclusion, each slight, each deliberate dismissal, chipped away at my sense of belonging and left me questioning whether my mother truly loved me or whether Alex's influence had convinced her I wasn't worth her attention. It was humiliating and lonely. I became quiet, cautious, and hesitant to express my thoughts or feelings. I learned to hide my victories, my opinions, and even my pain, because Alex had trained me, subtly and methodically, to expect dismissal or criticism. I felt trapped in a house where I should have been safe, but instead, I was carefully monitored, judged, and undermined. The psychological toll was immense. I began to shrink, retreating into myself, afraid that any sign of confidence or joy would be met with his disapproval. The home that was once my sanctuary had transformed into a cage, one that my mother seemed unable to notice or, perhaps, unable to challenge. One evening, after another failed attempt to speak to my mother alone, I sat on the stairs, my back against the wall, and cried. I realized that Alex had been isolating me not for my mother's sake, not for any good reason, but for his own sense of control. He had manipulated both of us, creating distance where love should have existed, making me question my value in the eyes of the one person who should have been my refuge. That was the moment I began to understand the depth of his deception, the years of subtle manipulation, and the long road ahead if I wanted to reclaim my voice, my identity, and my bond with my mother. The realization hit me with a heavy, cold clarity. Alex wasn't just a controlling stepdad, he was a calculated manipulator, and I had been caught in his web for years. I had no idea what secrets he was keeping or how far he had gone to reshape my mother's perception of me. But one thing was certain, I could no longer ignore the truth. Something had to change, and I had to find a way to uncover it. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I finally stumbled onto the truth. I had been searching through old family photo albums and letters, trying to piece together fragments of my relationship with my mother that felt intentionally erased. The smell of damp paper and musty books filled the room, and the rain tapping against the window sounded like a heartbeat, steady and insistent, as if urging me to uncover what had been hidden for years. I wasn't prepared for what I found. Beneath the pile of letters addressed to my mom were notes, receipts, and messages carefully concealed detailing Alex's manipulation. My hands trembled as I realized how methodical he had been, orchestrating my isolation with precision, keeping me invisible in my mother's life. I began reading the notes in disbelief. There were emails Alex had sent to my mother, disguised as reminders or suggestions that painted me as difficult or too sensitive, subtly convincing her that she could manage without me. One note, dated the year I turned 12, included the chilling line, "She doesn't need Emma. It's easier for both of us if she steps back." I felt bile rise in my throat, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and heartbreak. This wasn't just casual control, it was deliberate psychological manipulation, carefully constructed to separate me from the one person who had always been my anchor. Every memory of being dismissed, ignored, or isolated now felt like a thread in a web he had spun to trap both of us. The photographs were equally damning. There were images of me as a child, captured in moments of vulnerability and used as evidence in Alex's notes to portray me as overly emotional or untrustworthy. The thought that someone so close, someone I had been forced to call family, had watched me, judged me, and weaponized my innocence made my skin crawl. I pressed my palms to my face, stifling a sob, the tears blending with the rain streaking the windows. The betrayal wasn't just about the isolation, it was about being turned into a pawn in someone else's game. Stripped of agency and love in the most intimate space imaginable, my own home. As I sifted through more letters and documents, I discovered something even worse. Alex had been intercepting messages from my mother, selectively showing her letters and texts to support his narrative while withholding anything that expressed her love or concern for me. He had rewritten reality, bending my mother's perspective until she appeared distant, disinterested, or even resentful. I realized with a sickening clarity that every time I had tried to reach out to my mom and been met with what I thought was indifference, it had been orchestrated. He had built walls between us, convincing me that my mother didn't need me, while simultaneously controlling what she saw and believed about me. My hands shook as I thought back over the past year's missed birthday celebrations. Afternoons spent alone while Alex and my mom had important discussions, dinners where my contributions were ignored, and moments when my presence seemed unnecessary or burdensome. Each incident was no longer random or accidental. They were deliberate, calculated pieces of a long-term plan. Rage and grief collided inside me, leaving me raw and unsteady. I felt both anger at Alex for his cruelty and a deep sorrow for my mother, who had been manipulated into a false perception of me. I sank to the floor. The pile of letters and photos spread around me like a battlefield. I realized that uncovering this truth was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating, because finally, I could see the scale of his deception. Terrifying, because confronting him would be dangerous. I knew Alex would deny everything, twist reality, and attempt to gaslight me as he had done so many times before. But one thing had changed. I now had evidence. The undeniable proof of his manipulation and the knowledge that my mother's love had never wavered. Alex had just hidden it from both of us. By the time the rain had stopped, I had made a decision. I couldn't let Alex continue to control our lives. I couldn't let him rewrite our family history or my relationship with my mother. I carefully gathered the letters, photographs, and emails, my pulse hammering in my ears, and realized that confrontation was inevitable. I would need courage, strategy, and patience. But for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. My mother needed to know the truth, and I was determined to show her before Alex could manipulate reality again. That was the moment everything changed. I understood the full depth of his deceit, and I knew I couldn't allow it to continue. The days leading up to the confrontation were unbearable. I couldn't eat properly, my thoughts looping endlessly around every detail I had uncovered. Each time I saw Alex, his casual smirk, the way he leaned back as if he owned the room, filled me with a mixture of dread and fury. I rehearsed my words over and over in my mind, imagining the exact phrasing that would leave no room for denial or evasion. My hands shook as I held the letters and emails, gripping them like armor, each one a weapon against the man who had stolen years of my life, isolating me from the only person I had ever truly loved. I decided to confront him in the living room where the most recent incidents of isolation had occurred. The house felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in with the weight of memories tainted by betrayal. The faint scent of Alex's cologne lingered in the air, mixed with the subtle warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the curtains. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my nerves. This confrontation wasn't just about anger, it was about truth, justice, and reclaiming my voice. If I failed, I knew he would continue to manipulate reality, and the years of isolation would have been in vain. When Alex arrived home that evening, I could see him immediately. He leaned casually against the kitchen counter, scrolling on his phone. His smirk widened when he saw me, as though he thought our lives were as under his control as they always had been. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of fear and righteous anger surging through me. "Alex," I said, my voice trembling but firm, "we need to talk. Now." He glanced up, surprised by the sudden seriousness in my tone. And for the first time, I noticed the flicker of unease in his eyes. My pulse quickened. This was my moment, and I couldn't let it slip away. I placed the letters, emails, and photographs on the counter, spreading them out so that there was no room for him to dismiss or twist the truth. "Do you recognize these?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. He tried to brush it off, giving me a nervous laugh, but I cut him off. "No, Alex, don't lie. I know what you've done. I know how you've manipulated Mom, isolated me, and made me feel invisible in my own home. I have the proof right here." His jaw tightened, and I could see his hands clench at his sides. For the first time, the air around him seemed heavy, tense, as if the casual authority he always exuded was cracking under the weight of the evidence. The confrontation escalated quickly. He started speaking over me, his voice rising, trying to gaslight me, claiming I was imagining things, that I was misinterpreting his intentions. But I had anticipated this. I calmly presented each piece of evidence, each note and email, highlighting the deliberate manipulations and lies. I saw the color drain from his face as he realized that this wasn't just an accusation. It was undeniable truth laid bare. My anger and heartbreak mingled into a sharp clarity. Every attempt he made to twist reality was met with calm, unwavering facts. He was no longer in control. His power had been stripped away by the truth. At one point, I looked directly at my mother, who had entered the kitchen quietly, drawn by the tension. The mixture of shock, confusion, and sorrow in her eyes was heartbreaking. I realized then that Alex had hidden so much from her too, that his manipulation had kept her from seeing her own child as she truly felt. The sight of my mother's realization, her eyes welling with tears, gave me strength I didn't know I had. I was no longer the powerless teenager he had kept isolated for years. I was reclaiming my voice, my family, and my life. The room felt electric with tension. Every detail, the way Alex shifted uncomfortably, the sound of our voices reverberating, the hum of the refrigerator in the background intensifying the moment. I could feel the final twist approaching, the culmination of years of manipulation coming to light. This confrontation wasn't just about words or evidence, it was about exposing the full scope of his deception and ensuring he could never hurt me or my mother again. The moment my mother stepped fully into the kitchen, the weight of years of deception hit us both at once. Her eyes, wide and glistening with unshed tears, flicked from the letters and emails to me, and then to Alex, who was frozen mid-step, as if the evidence had physically struck him. For the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of exposure, of losing control, of being finally unmasked. My chest tightened, a mixture of relief, vindication, and heartbreak flooding through me. The woman I had thought was distant had never stopped needing me. Alex had lied, manipulated, and hidden her love. But the truth was finally standing between us like a sunbeam breaking through storm clouds. I don't understand, my mom whispered, her voice trembling. I held up one of the letters, showing her the lines Alex had written to convince her I wasn't needed, and pointed to the emails, each carefully designed to make her question our bond. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening as recognition dawned. The anger and shame that crossed her face mirrored my own emotions. She had been deceived, yes, but her love for me had never faltered. It had just been trapped beneath layers of manipulation she hadn't recognized until now. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were different this time. A mix of sorrow for lost time and relief that truth had finally surfaced. Alex stumbled, trying to explain, to justify, but I no longer needed his words. The power he had wielded for so long was gone, stripped away by evidence and the recognition in my mother's eyes. He sputtered, attempting to twist reality, but every lie crumbled the moment it left his lips. I could feel the tension in the room spike with every failed excuse, every defensive gesture, every moment he realized he had lost control. The casual smirk, the manipulative charm, the calm arrogance, everything was gone, replaced by panic, shame, and the unbearable weight of truth. Karma, I realized, wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure, and exposure was complete. I stepped closer to my mother, taking her hand gently in mine. "Mom, he's been lying to both of us for years," I said, my voice steady despite the torrent of emotions within me. "He told me you didn't need me. He made me feel invisible, like I didn't belong here, but it wasn't true. You've always loved me." Her eyes filled with tears, her grip tightening around my hand as she nodded. The first real connection in years, bridging the gap Alex had tried to create. For the first time in over 3 years, I felt the warmth and safety of her love without the shadow of manipulation looming over it. The years of isolation, the silent dinners, the canceled outings, they all faded slightly in the light of this newfound clarity. Alex finally realized he couldn't regain control. He stood there, cornered by his own deception, the evidence scattered across the counter like broken pieces of his The humiliation he felt was nothing compared to the suffering he had caused. And I watched as the man who had tried to erase me was reduced to a trembling, defensive figure. There was no charm left to save him, no words clever enough to repair the damage. I felt a cold satisfaction, but it wasn't cruel, it was justice. He had misused trust, manipulated love, and isolated me from the person who mattered most. And now he had to face the consequences, not through vengeance, but through the undeniable truth laid bare. We spent hours talking after that. My mother and I shared stories, tears, and laughter, filling the spaces Alex had tried to hollow out. Each word, each memory restored a fragment of the bond he had tried to sever. I realized that although the damage could never fully disappear, it could be repaired with honesty, openness, and vigilance. The isolation had been cruel, but it had also made me stronger, more determined to protect myself and the people I love from manipulation and deceit. As I finally climbed into my room that night, exhausted but lighter than I had felt in years, I looked at the letters and emails once more. They were evidence, yes, but they were also proof of my resilience, my courage, and the unbreakable bond between my mother and me. I understood that some wounds take time to heal, but the foundation had been restored. Alex's deception had failed, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that the truth had reclaimed our lives, and love, true unbroken love, had prevailed.